right, good evening, everybody. We're going to have the opportunity tonight to do some deep textual analysis of that bird song. And in fact, that bird song is the locator of one of my favorite Ikar memories. It was not this past Yom Kippur because, you know, we weren't in shul, but the one before that, Hillel played, you know, Hillel has a gift for finding the right pop song that matches the moment, that feels spiritual. And this one is a pop song that that is really taken directly from the book that we're going to look at tonight, the book of Ecclesiastes. And he played it, and it was like my moment right after the song to tell people where to go. A lot of a rabbi's job, turns out, is telling people what page we're on. And so the room was silent, like 2,000 people in the room. And I was like, okay, if you could turn to page 179. It was like, oh, I had arrived. Like I was like bad humor, like bad rabbinic humor. Like I'm the real deal now. So yeah, so the book of Ecclesiastes, that's what we're gonna look at tonight. Let's say a blessing to bring some gratitude to our learning, to acknowledge the holiness of this space. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so the book of Ecclesiastes. Wow, the book of Ecclesiastes. It is, this one's a doozy. We have been tracking the poetry of King Solomon. And that in itself is a little bit of that's a construct, the idea that there's the poetry of King Solomon, because we're relying on a tradition that attributes 3 books to King Solomon. The Song of Songs, the book of Proverbs, and now Ecclesiastes. And there are reasons for that, but it's also strange. I mean, even in this book, it's strange because the King Solomon is actually not called Solomon, and there are different voices in the book. It's never clear who's exactly speaking. So the whole thing is a kind of it's like a legend or a way of thinking about these books. Can we imagine that these are the books of a wise king, the wisest of all kings, reflecting on, you know, offering that wisdom? These are, in fact, called sometimes the wisdom literature books of Jewish tradition. And we have also been we've been tracking the poetry of King Solomon through the lens of a midrash, a particular rabbinic reading of this legend, which I just love and has been very useful to me in thinking about these books and in kind of stacking them one after another. And I'm going to share that just to remind us of the midrash that we looked at the very beginning of our journey. Midrash is put together and around the same time as the Talmud. So these are like Talmudic rabbis, and one of them is Rabbi Yonatan. And he says, Song of Songs was written first, after that Proverbs, and after that Ecclesiastes. And Rabbi Yonatan proved this from studying the way of the world. For when a person is young, he speaks words of song, Song of Songs. When he grows into an adult, he speaks words of instruction, divrei mashalot, like the aphorisms, the parables of King Solomon. And then when he becomes old, he speaks words of emptiness, divrei havalim. This word is a word we're going to be soon spending some time trying to figure out. But the first time we translate it, and the time that we looked at this before, we stuck with the translation emptiness. Words of emptiness. Now that already should be strange. Here, I'm having trouble with my little bar here. Okay, I'm back. That already should be strange to you. Words of emptiness. Like, why would there be a book on emptiness, right? In our Bible, written by King Solomon. But that's the whole thing with Ecclesiastes. It is a very formidable book. You could build a whole religion, a whole philosophy out of the book of Ecclesiastes. And indeed, one way to think about this book is that it is a book of more than almost any other book in the Bible. It's a book of philosophy. and we could meditate on Kohelet for a lifetime. That could be our whole religion. In fact, I once did a teaching gig at a shul in Denver called Kohelet. That was the name of their shul, and I was just so jealous that they oh, we got a Denverite out there. I was just so jealous that they came up with that, because that's such a great name, such a great reference point, because there's something about Kohelet, this book, that's the name in Hebrew, Kohelet, that is so deep. So it's sort of like, it is the symbol of philosophical depth in the Hebrew Bible, but that depth is also, it's deep. Another adjective is that it's dark. It's a very, in some ways, very dark book. Some would call it Stoic philosophy, you know, like kind of severe and simplistic, and some would even say nihilistic, right? Like, is this a book which is somehow at its core telling us that everything is meaningless? Could that be what the book is saying? Is that, and if so, what's it doing in the Tanakh? We spent some time at the beginning wondering how it is that the Song of Songs could have been included in the Holy Scriptures. This song, this poem about sensuality, sex, love, right? But that's like, that at least is a beautiful, celebrated thing. But the things that Ecclesiastes says about life are damn near heresy, right, in some places. So we're gonna have to figure this out. We're gonna have to spend some time meditating on it. Okay, here is I'm gonna put in the chat our source sheet for tonight, and I had a pretty easy job figuring out what to look at, which I don't always have, because Proverbs, that was like 31 chapters. Which one do I pick? So I picked one. The book of Ecclesiastes is 12 chapters, it's shorter, and most of them are not usually rendered as verse. Remember, we said it in one of our first classes, it's never totally clear when poetry appears in the Hebrew Bible, because it's not usually written like poetry, except in cases like the Song of the Sea. But some things just feel so poetic that it's obvious, right? Some people think the whole Bible is written in verse form, but that seems like a stretch. But there are pieces of Ecclesiastes, of Kohelet, that appear clearly as poetry, and one of them is the lyrics to that bird song. Okay, so there are 3 sections, and they're short sections that we're going to look at tonight, just 8 verses each. But it's actually it was very, the whole thing was very elegant, because there's one poem at the beginning, and then there's one poem at the end. So poetry in this book serves as a kind of a bookend, and that in itself is useful to us. So, you know, we couldn't possibly understand all of the wisdom of Ecclesiastes tonight, but maybe by limiting it to the poetry of Ecclesiastes, we can get something out of it, okay? And something, not just something, but some of the most important things, because some of the famous lines of Ecclesiastes are in these opening and closing poems. Okay, so let's just start, and let's start looking at the words. And as usual, before we get into the poetry, we have just sort of an announcement, dun, 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 like this is about to be a book of the Bible. And the announcement is Divrei Kohelet ben David Melech b'Yerushalayim. The words of Kohelet, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, this is already weird, right? Like we can already, there's something already quite strange here, and that is the name Kohelet. Like, who's that guy? Not only does it not say the words of Solomon, son of David, king of Jerusalem, king in Jerusalem, which it did last week. The book of Proverbs opens that way, Solomon. The book of the Song of Songs is Shir Ashirim Asher LeShlomo, like the Song of Songs, which Solomon wrote. So references to Solomon. This one says the son of David, but it's Kohelet. It's a new name. He's got a new name. And that's not a name. It's not like there was another son and they just, like, we don't know that name. So what is that, first of all? And I want to give us a little poetry to chew on and not just dwell on that question. But just so you know that it's like the title, Kohelet, and so we have to think, what does that mean? Well, Kohelet means, in Hebrew, a kahal is a congregation, a gathering. Vayakel Moshe is when Moses gathered together the people, which is why the book is called Ecclesiastes. It sounds strange, like, is this an ecumenical book? But it's just the Latin for bringing things all together. So poetically, you know, we might say, oh, like Solomon's taken on a new name, and the name means something like gathering it all together. So the easy thing to say is, like, is this him gathering together all of the wisdom over his life? I don't know. I'm not sure that it remains a little mysterious, but just keep that in mind, that this is somehow the words of Kohelet instead of the words of Solomon. Okay, let's now read the first section here so that we have what to think about. And I'm going to read it through, but we're going to spend a lot of time just talking about the opening line, because the opening line is not only a classic, famous, but it is also the word that, that we've seen before. Divrei Havalim, when he becomes old, words of emptiness. Now this word, don't worry, I'm not going to talk the whole time. I'm soon going to read this poetry, but this word, Hevel, it does mean emptiness, or it could mean emptiness, or it's often translated as vanity, vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity, right? And that picks up on certain formulations that actually we'll see in the book of, like, everything is hevel v'ra'ot ruach. Everything is just it sounds like hot air. Everything is just hot air, right? Could mean vanity, could mean futility, right? So emptiness, fine. But I translated it, I just chose, and I could have left it untranslated, or I could have used one of those standards. I translated it as vapors, because Hevel also means breath, or not even breath, like breathing, but the sort of the breath that comes out. One of the famous rabbinic formulations is Ha'olam mitkayem, the world stands on Hevel pihem shel tinokot shel Beit Rabban. The world rests on the breath of the little children who studied in the yeshiva of the rabbi. In other words, the world rests on just like the first little utterances of children. Beautiful phrase, only helpful to us though in this moment, in the sense that it is in that case really about the actual breath. Oh, I just hear myself. If you are unmuted, could you mute yourself? Because it echoes. Okay, so Hevel also means breath, and I've actually translated it as vapor because it's a little bit like, it's not the full breath. We have words for that, and like nishama or nishima, but like something that's like ether, something that's like not there, or almost there, like a vapor. And I'm spending a lot of time on this because I really want us to think about what is the meaning of this line. But just one more thing about the word Hevel, which is what's the first Hevel? My Hebrew speakers will pick up on this surely, because they're wont to call this, yes, Yael?
Cain and Abel. Abel, Hevel.
Exactly. Abel, we say Abel in English, the word is Hevel. Right, exactly right. And so that's interesting. Abel, who was killed by Cain. That's basically all Abel does in the Bible. So Hevel, the first Hevel in the Bible, is someone who was briefly and then wasn't. Right? Someone who existed and then quickly vanished. That's, I think, also helpful for us, as you'll soon see. Okay, so let's read this opening poem. It is a kind of like meant as an opening poem, and then we'll spend some time chewing on this first line. What does it mean to say that everything is vapor, or everything is empty, or everything is futile, or and even having said that, we're already in the the question of nihilism here. Like, what exactly is going on? Okay, but let's take a look. Let's read these opening verses. Okay, the words of Kohelet, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Havel havalim, amar Kohelet. Havel havalim, hakol havel. Vapors, said Kohelet. Vapors. Everything is just vapor. Ma yitron la'adam, b'chol amalo sheyamol tachat hashemesh. What real gain is there for a person from all of his toiling under the sun? Dor holech v'dor ba, v'ha'aretz le'olam omadet. One generation goes, another comes, but the earth stands forever. V'zarach hashemesh uva hashemesh ve'el mekomo sho'ef zoreach husham. The sun rises and the sun sets, and then glides back to where it rises. Holech el darom v'sovev el tzafon, sovev sovev holech haruach el svivotav shab haruach. Southward blowing, turning northward, ever turning blows the winds. On its round, the wind returns. Kol hanachalim holchim el hayam, v'hayam einenu maleh. El makom shehanachalim holchim sham, hem shavim lalechet. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. These streams go to one place and then they flow back again. Kol advarim yegeim, lo yuchal ish ledaber, v'lo tisba ayin lirot, v'lo timale ozen mishmoa. All such things are wearisome. No man can ever state them. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear enough of hearing. Mashahaya hu sheyehyeh, umashenasa hu sheyeaseh, ve'im kol chadash tachat hashemesh. What has been, will be. What has been done, will be done. And there's nothing new under the sun. Okay, classic there. Nothing new under the sun, right? Classic line. We'll spend some time thinking about it, but let's finally dig in and think about this opening line. What the heck is going on here? Havel, havalim, everything is emptiness, everything is vapor, everything is breath, everything is futile, everything is vanity. However you want to translate it, what is Kohelet saying here? What does it mean? So let's start there. First brave soul. Who shall it be? Matt Silverstein is a brave one.
Well, the obvious is that he's saying nothing matters. He's saying nothing matters because it doesn't last. In particular, it's not that it doesn't matter because it will be gone.
Okay, I'm going to revert. That's great what Matt's given us. I'm going to sort of reverse the way you formulated it. It is definitely true that he is saying that all things pass. Everything vanishes. That seems clear. And then Matt hears in that an implication, and so it doesn't matter. The things which are not permanent are the things which ultimately are sort of meaningless because they don't endure. You want to add to that, Matt?
I just wanted to a translation thing. The best illustration I've heard is that Bell is the vapor when you breathe on a piece of glass. Mm-hmm. That it's not just your breath but that you breathe on glass and it makes a cloud and that cloud goes away. And that's what he's saying. It's the disappearance.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. That's a great image, right? Imagine yourself, just to continue that, and imagine another version is breathing in the cold air. Right? Maybe we can accomplish that in LA right now. But those of us in colder climates know, it's like you breathe and you see your breath and then it's gone.
Gone.
Right? So that's the idea. I saw Florine had a hand up.
I just feel it's when you speak and you aspirate and the sound goes out and it dissipates. Well, that for me is latching on to the laws of creation. They're always in motion. So that nothing really disappears. It becomes another entity. The atom becomes something else. Everything becomes something else. And so for me, it's not nihilism. It actually is beautiful. For me, it's just that movement. It's always taking place.
Love that. Love that. Typically, a poetic our sort of like the most poetic of our representatives here in this poetic class. Florine is saying that agrees with Matt that things vanish, but that there's something, you know, just get used to it. The world is flux. Everything is always changing, and that there's, as Florine said, something quite beautiful about that. And just, but you can't hold on to it. Maybe I would add, like that maybe is the lesson. You can't hold on, but it doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just don't get too attached. Alexandra?
I love that Florine used the word aspirate, because I was going to talk about respiration and inspire. So in English, like breath is the same, SPIR, like respiration, is the same as inspiration and spiritual. And I also, same roots. And I heard a Kabbalistic rabbi talk about how the breath is the soul, and so I guess, yeah, this very much goes along with Florine's comment, how the breath is everything. And I'm wondering, no, I'll stop there.
Good. So that idea, I mean, what you've added is quite significant, right? Because Florine tells us everything is in flux, everything is moving, everything is changing. And Alexandra says, yeah, and so are we. We too will vanish. We're a part of the process of just like Abel, we one day will dissipate. And that we have to get used to. So maybe the question behind Kohelet is, well, what endures? Right? Remember, the Dor Haba, Dor Holech, generations move, but the earth stands. So there is, maybe is there something in us, in existence, which we can rely on, or is everything just movement? And before we get too carried away with the beauty of Florine's description, let's not lose sight of Matt's more cynical read here, because there's real reason to see some cynicism in here. Remember, after all, the next line is, Ma yitron la'adam b'cholam alo. What real gain is there for a person? All of his toiling under the sun. You work and you work and you work and you work. And this is one of the main messages of the book, is that it's like nothing. It doesn't, you'd work your whole life and it comes to nothing. What's the point? What's the gain? I mean, is there something in here that's like, is there a message that it's all kind of worthless? It's worthless to try, right? So we've got the kind of the spiritual flux of things, but we've also got a certain nihilistic streak. So I invite others to take up either of those. I think I saw Liz Fields had a hand up.
What I was going to say before is that the breath can be everything. And if you turn that phrase around, like, you know, toil doesn't lead to anything. Well, maybe life isn't about toil. Maybe it's bigger than, it transcends toil. And the gain is not in the work of one's hands, but maybe the gain is in the breath and the things that we absorb elsewhere.
Good. So Liz's interpretation here points us to another one of the messages that we will hear throughout the book of Kohelet, which is something like eat, drink, and be merry. And that's like paraphrase, but almost a direct quote. And there is a kind of like, don't spend all your time working, trying to gain things, trying to amass wealth in particular is suspicious. Instead, just enjoy, because that's all there is. Just enjoy. And I said, like, this is like vaguely heretical. I mean, here's another kind of Greek philosophical word. This is Epicureanism, right? Just all that matters is right here, because for tomorrow we die, right? And one has to wonder, if it isn't nihilism, is it Epicureanism, which the rabbis regarded as a great heresy, by the way. In fact, the rabbi's word for heresy, fun fact, is apikoros, Epicurean, right? That idea that just everything ends when you die, so just like live it up in the meantime, that was the chief heresy that the rabbis saw around them. So, right, like there's something I like about Liz's message, actually, but it's still a surprising one to emerge from the Tanakh here. Jen, what do you think?
I'm surprised that we're framing this so much in terms of impermanence, because there's just as much imagery in this part about permanence, about what doesn't change? Like only the earth remains. The winds go on their course and come back. The rivers flow out and then they flow back. There's a lot of sameness going on here too. Whether we can read that as being weary of the sameness or standing with some kind of dual consciousness of the sameness or optimistic about the sameness, I don't know, but it's not all impermanence at all in this passage.
Great, thank you for that, Jen. Very, very important not to lose sight of the things which remain, but also I'm gonna add another word to Jen's description, which is there are cycles here. And it isn't just that things vanish, actually they keep coming back around, right? What keeps coming back around? Generations come and go. Here, let's see the words in front of us. The sun, right? The sun goes and then sets and then comes back again. The wind, right? Which goes but then returns. The sea, the streams which go into the sea, and there's this way in which like the sea is never full. That feels like, oh, they never accomplish anything. But then again, then they come back and they flow back again, right? So we have these cycles and we're a part of this cycle. So what do cycles have to do with it? And especially because as Jen says, cycles are not annihilation, cycles are just rotation. So how do we fit that rotation into our understanding of this Hevel Havalim, this message? Let's see, Emil.
Just like a question really, which goes to what you're just saying and what Jen said. Like verse number 9, is that suggesting there's like a bigger cycle of like repetition, you know, that like what I do, someone else will do, you know, generations from now? Or is it sort of saying, like what has been will be? Does that mean that like we're all we're all in this kind of like cosmic cycle? Or is it just sort of saying like everything's done, like nothing, what has been done will be done, like sort of like Sisyphus, you know, like is that sort of real, or is it just like it's all over, we missed it?
Right. I mean, that last line, and it has such a rhythm to it. By the way, speaking of cycles, a lot of the poetry itself is the sound of the words, and I hope you heard this a little bit, the sound of the words express that sort of cyclical motion. Holech el darom, v'sovev el tzafon, sovev, holech, right? There's a kind of rhythmic quality, and so too here at the end. Ma shehaya hu sheyehyeh, ma shenasa hu sheyeaseh, right? What has been will be, what has been done will be done. So Emil asked the question, and I don't have a good answer to it, so I just throw it back out to the group. What's going on here? Where there is everything has already been done. And famously, there's nothing new under the sun. That's part of the message here. So,
and just in that line, though, it also seems like there is that doubleness of like, it's sort of comforting because it's like, whatever this circus is, we all do it together, or it's like, or it could be bleak. Like, what's the point of trying anything? Like my grandfather probably did it already, you know, or,
yeah, great. And look, it's a great book in part because it's a little uncertain. Like we don't actually know which way it's tilting. So let's continue to dig into that. But part of what we're investigating now is this idea, this famous idea, maybe the most famous one, there's nothing new under the sun. What's that mean? Okay, I'm gonna go to Marlena and then Michal.
I was going to say that there is a permanence, there is a rhythm, there is a way of looking at things that you can count on. Maybe the difference is between the natural world, the natural rhythm of the world, and man.
That's just what I was going to say.
Yeah. Oh, see,
Carol, go ahead.
10 minutes. Sorry,
Okay.
I didn't realize I wasn't muted.
Okay, but I think that's good. If Marlena's saying something that resonates, then Marlena, have you said it, or do you have more to add? Marlena.
No. I mean, when I teach this, but I teach it with the picture of Dorian Gray. So I do that, I use the word vanity and uselessness in that. But it's that the dichotomy between the natural world, which you can always depend on for the ceaseless regularity, and then the man-made world, which is perhaps futile in a great deal of instances.
Okay, this comment's really helpful because there's a lot of very physical, tangible, natural imagery in Kohelet. right? And the question is, what is our place in the natural world, right? And are we like the natural world? Are we distinct from it, right? Do we just participate? Is this another way to think about it? Is this a materialist book? Or, as Marlene seems to suggest, no, or there's something different about the way the world works and the way that we, the humans, the generations work. Carol, I'm so curious if you want to pick up on that, and then we'll turn to Michal after that.
I'm sitting in semi-darkness here. A couple of things. I was going to say exactly what you said, Marlene, so I'm very flattered that you thought of it too. Also, there's a line somewhere, and I actually went to get my schoolgirl St. James Bible.
There we go. Wow.
The translation.
James is on the table.
Yeah, I've had this since I was from 1951, I think it is. It's very cute. Anyway, I always have it beside me wherever I am because I like to look it up. Isn't there a quotation somewhere, something about something doesn't dig and delve the way we do? Something in the natural world doesn't work in the fields. I don't know whether that's the New or the Old Testament, having grown up with both. But also alluding to the fact that the natural world is something which goes in cycles, which is going back to Genesis when God created the earth and all the various planets in their circles, and the seasons and the trees and the animals. And then came to mankind. And man has to work, whereas these things just are preordained, and the sea flows out and it flows in, and the winds blow, and so on and so forth. But I will look up that quotation when I'm off the line, and then I'll be able to quote it properly.
Great, I love it, I love it. Okay, good, so this is nice, this like extended reflection on just like the natural order. Because I think that is part of this reflection, is the reflection of a person looking out at the world and just watching the sun rise and set. And you can imagine that person thinking about, gosh, it's just the same every day. What is the point of my life? Or what is the point of everything I'm trying to accomplish in my life? Or forget about the sun. Now we know that we're actually a speck in the midst of a vast galaxy, which is just one of, infinite galaxies, and we're so small, we're so nothing, right? Maybe that's the reflection that Kohelet is offering us here. Okay, I'm going to take the hands that are up, and then we've I think gotten the introduction, and we'll move to the next section. So let's hear the last few interpretations from Michal, Yael, and then Regina.
So I want to actually offer an opposite approach to this.
Surprise.
No, to what was just said, not to you, not to everyone. But what I love about the word hevel, in its connotation of vapor, I often use mist when I'm teaching this, or aspiration, respiration, is that it is actually part of the cycle of water, right? There are water droplets in our breath. It goes into the cycle of all of the other, I'm not saying scientifically, I'm saying poetically. Yeah. It goes into the cycle. And because you bring up the present moment and what we know about our place in the world, the thing that I actually love about our place in the world is we never disappear. We become molecules that then we breathe. We are breathing the molecules of our ancestors. So it's not that the human cycle is separate, right? You better have good breath.
It's like put on my mask, filter it out.
It's not that the human cycle is separate. It's that we are bound up in it. That's it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful, and a really lovely. It's amazing to think of this ancient poet thinking through exactly that, those sorts of thoughts, that water turns into vapor and then comes back down again, right? And as drops, and that, right? And could it be that the ancient poet was also speculating that like somehow we must also, right? And we'll see. Well, let's keep that in mind, because we'll see how I think Michal's sort of formulation actually appears like almost precisely towards the end of Kohelet. So let's hold that in mind. Yael.
I think Kohelet is debating with himself. He spent his whole life building the temple. This is all of his money, his energy, and building things that were tangible. The temple and wives and horses and palaces and children and things that he thought he could hold on to. And he reached that and found out, didn't do it. It didn't do the trick. It didn't fill me. So now he has another voice. It's a different part of himself. Like you were talking about last week, he has 3 different facets of his life and of himself. And he says, but on the other hand, the sea's never full. You know, the sun rises every day, and we're of an organic nature, maybe not a material nature, but an organic nature. So I think he's trying this on.
That's great. That's great. And Yael is reminding us of this framework that we've been using, and it is very helpful here, isn't it? You can see why they imagined that this was Solomon at the end of his life, because this is the person who has amassed all this, everything Yael said. I think that's very, very well set, very kind of well sort of like placed as a scene, right? To imagine this at the end of King Solomon's life. Regina.
Well, I was thinking more of the cycle of our life. You know, we see the flow of the water and the flow of everything. So and where do we go? And is this, where does our soul go? It made me think about that.
Good, yeah. I think that's the right question. And I think to like make the question even sharper, I think, or even more problematic, I would add one, which is that one of the sort of dilemmas in Kohelet is whether it is saying, whether it is that the book is asking that question, or whether it's saying like, forget about all this soul stuff, right? Like we're just us. We're just, you know, like it's just a life. Like, does Kohelet, is Kohelet aspiring to, right, to use the word that's been kicked around a little bit, something higher, or is it really just like, forget about all that stuff? Right? So that's also one of the questions hovering about, is there a more, is there a great beyond? Okay, speaking of cycles, let's now move to the most famous part of Kohelet, the most obvious, I think, poetic part of Kohelet, but obvious in part because it's such simple poetry, but it's simple, but it's strong, right? And this is where the bird song comes from, and it's pretty remarkable. It's almost word for word. In fact, as I was translating it, I found myself following their translation. But here it is. Lakol zman, sorry, that looks like a different phrase, but it pauses there. Lakol zman, ve'et lechol chefetz tachat hashamayim. There is to everything a season, and a time for every desire under heaven. Eit laledet ve'et lamut. Eit leta'at ve'et lakor natua. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot the plant. Eit laharog ve'et lirpo. Eit lifrotz ve'et livnot. A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build. Eit livkot ve'et lischok. Eit spod ve'et rekod. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Eit lashlich avanim ve'et knos avanim. Eit lachabok ve'et lirchok mechabek. A time to cast away stones and a time to, oh, that's a misspelling, and a time to gather stones. And a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to stay away from embraces. Eit lebakesh ve'et la'abed. Eit lishmor ve'et lashlich. A time to seek and a time to lose, a time to guard and a time to discard. Eit likroa ve'et litpor. Eit lachashot ve'et ledaber. A time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak. Eit lehov ve'et lisno. Eit milchama ve'et shalom. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. I swear it's not too late. Okay, so that's the song. What's the message? Okay, like turn. What's the message? Like, given what we've been saying so far, we're like, it's like kind of deep, intricate stuff that we were processing in the first poem, but this is just like, there's a time for this and a time for this, and they're opposites, and sometimes you kill and sometimes you heal, and sometimes, but what's the message there? I'd love to hear, what do people think about in light of everything being Hevel? So, I mean, let me just ask that. What do you think is the message here? Yonatan.
Yeah, I think there's an idea here that we are attached to the idea that certain things are good and certain things are bad, but that's not necessarily the case. In light of the Hevel discussion, I think what Kohelet is angling at is impermanence is not a problem. The problem is our discomfort with impermanence combined with our conviction that we deserve or should be comfortable, and that really circumstances change, and that is just the reality we live in, and it's not a bad thing. It just is.
Beautifully put. So eloquently put. Let me like sort of build on Yonatan's point, but also in a way to turn it into a question, because Yonatan is right. There seems to be there's a time for war. There's a time for hating. There's a time for killing. These things which we think of as the bad things, there's just a time for, so exactly as Yonatan put it, but some of them are strange. Like, what does it mean that there's a time to refrain from embracing? I mean, actually, we're in a time when we refrain, but like a time to uproot plants, and a time to tear things. Like, what is I think Yonatan is really onto something, but some of these times are odd. Like, some of the actions there's a time to uproot plants. When is that time? And what do we do with the balancing here? So I'm really just riffing on what Yonatan said so beautifully, but I'd love to hear other thoughts. Hannah?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this and the connection to this last part about that there's nothing new under the sun and everything has kind of happened before. And I think that in the past, I don't know, I thought of that as kind of annoying. Like, what do you mean there's nothing new? Like, of course there are new things, and things happen that have never happened to me before or happened to you or them or whoever. But I think this year, actually, people have spent so much energy talking about, this is so unprecedented. This has never happened before. And that has actually been a place of real fear, that there's something really reassuring about this thought that there's nothing new. That even when we feel like we've never lived through a pandemic, how do we do this? We don't know what we're doing. Everything feels terrifying. There's nothing to grab onto. This is all so new. There's something really, really important, I think, about some understanding of something. This has happened before. We're going to be okay because someone has been through some version of this. There's nothing new. We're going to navigate it. And that this list is, yeah, kind of a hodgepodgey, weird list of things, but so is everything. Like, you can only list so many things. But I think there's some solace in it. Instead of feeling like we're so special, we're so different, there's something sometimes comforting about saying, maybe we're not. We're just another group of people figuring out how to be people, just like all the other groups of people before us. And our challenges might look a little different. They might show up in different costumes, but it's not that new.
Great. These are, what Hannah's just offered us is a thought that I think is distinct from Yonatan's, but they sort of go together. That is to say, Yonatan advises us, or through the mouth of Kohelet advises us, not, to get used to the cycle of things and not to favor one end of that cycle, but to know that, that there's always ups and downs, and don't get attached to the ups and don't get attached to the downs, right? Hannah is saying, yeah, and the cycle actually can be a comfort. The familiarity of the cycle, the belonging in a cycle. What do we call our lives if not a cycle, right? The cycle of life. So there's a rhythm here, and maybe that's a part of it, is learn the rhythm of the world, and then you will be more at home in the world. Right? I just saw Shep, my dear friend Shep, and then he disappeared. Are you still there, Shep?
I'm still there.
All right.
You pretty much covered it. I just would add to what Yonatan and Hannah and you were saying by talking about polarity management. It's not always about making a decision on either end of the spectrum, but making the right decision that keeps the cycle going. So sometimes you have to uproot the plants if your field is going to die, whether it's an actual field or your corporation or whatever it is. Difficult changes are important.
Yeah, thank you. That's where we can't lose sight of that. Because to say that there's a time for everything means that you must be conscious of the time, there's a time to kill. And that's the part we don't like, right? There's a time for war, there's a time for uprooting, there's time for destroying. It is part of the cycle, right? Just as we observe sort of destruction and regeneration in the natural world, so it will be true in our human lives, and we have to get used to that. All right, I'm gonna take one more comment from Payam, and then I want to read this last poetic piece of Kohelet. Payam, in his...
Well, I'll give the Pete Seeger interpretation of why it's an anti-war song, in that he's saying like all the negative stuff is happening right now. So when he wrote the song, Vietnam's going off and everything, and he's like, don't forget the other half of the equation, that yes, there's a time for war and that's what we're going through now, but there's also a time for peace. Let's move on to the second part of the story of the time, to plant stuff and to the positive things going on. Don't just focus on this negative aspect of it. So it's a song about hope. Yeah,
right. This too shall pass. This too shall pass. And that you have to be this is a time of sickness, right, in our world. But this will pass. And when it's not a time of sickness, maybe that message is also true. That will also pass. Maybe we need to keep that in mind, but we certainly need to keep it in mind in the time of sickness, right? So there's a kind of Payam suggests there is a kind of an optimism in this, what is often read as the sort of a grim cynicism. Okay, I want to make sure that we look at the last poem in the book of Kohelet, because the book goes on now. We saw a selection from chapter 1, chapter 3, and the book goes on and it offers its wisdom, and then it questions its wisdom, and it questions wisdom itself, and eat, drink, and be merry, and then it sort of turns to its final chapter, and there's a poem there that if the poem we just read was really simplistic, like a time for this and a time for this, powerful but simplistic, this last poem is sort of surprisingly exquisite. I mean, this could be a modern poem. The language here is so florid and really stunning. At least I found it so. So let's read through it here. And this is the last chapter of Kohelet. So I'm gonna ask you, like, how are we closing here? What is given what we've been discussing, how is Kohelet signing off? So take a look here. Really beautiful stuff. The Hebrew is difficult, so I may stumble, but it's really beautiful. Bayom sheyaz'u shomrei habayit v'hit'avtu anshei hachayil uvatlu hatochanot ki mi'etu v'chashchu hara'ot ba'arubot. When the guards of the house become shaky and the men of valor are bent, and the maids that grind grown few are idle, and the ladies that peer through the windows grow dim. V'sugru delatayim bashuk, bishval kol hatachana, v'yakum lekol hatzipur, v'yishachu kol bnot hashir. And the doors to the marketplace are all shut, with the noise of the hand mill growing fainter, and the song of the bird growing feebler, and all the strains of music dying down. Gam migavoa yirau, v'chat-chatim baderech, v'yanetz hashaked, v'yistabel ha'chagav, v'tafer ha'avyona, ki holech adam el beit olamo, v'savavu vashuk hasoftim. When one is afraid of heights and there is terror on the road, for the almond tree may blossom, the grasshopper be burdened, and the caper bush may bud again, but the person goes out to his eternal abode, with mourners gathered around in the street. Ad asher lo yeratek chevel hakesef, v'tarutz gulat hazahav, v'tishaver kad al hamabua, v'narotz hagalgal el habor. Before the silver cord snaps and the golden bowl crashes, the jar is shattered at the spring and the jug is smashed at the well. V'yashov he'afar el haaretz, kishahaya, v'haruach tashuv el ha'elohim asher natana. And the dust returns to the ground as it was, and the life breath returns to God who bestowed it. Havel havalim, amar hakohelet, hakol havel. Vapors, said Kohelet. Everything is just vapor. I just love that. I just love that. But what is it about? What are we talking about here? What's going on? Regina, is your hand still up from last time or no? What's this about? What's this last reflection? But Ellen.
Well, I was thinking in the part before, I see why this is attributed to him toward the end of his life, where you do kind of stop thinking about what kind of goods are you amassing and what kind of possessions do you have? What can you build? And you are much able to look down the road at, I don't know the right words to say it, but life kind of goes with ups and downs, and they're not necessarily high ups and high downs all the time, but it doesn't so much seem like a cycle to me because that is repetitive. And each wave is a little bit different and a little bit different. And as you get older, you get a very different perspective about all of that. And that's what I heard in the second part. And here he really is coming to grips with the end of that whole thing, that he is going to die. And the Hevel that he's talking about is going to go back to God. It seems to me, in looking at it like that our translation of Hevel doesn't really grab what it is, because yes, everything is breath, but that's vanity to me is kind of derogatory. And I think here at the end, it's not so derogatory. I think it's this the way the world works.
Wow, Ellen, beautiful. You just said a mouthful there. Okay, so first of all, I think Ellen is exactly right that this is about aging. It's about getting old. It's about, in fact, coming to the end. And this language here, very rich imagery, when the guards of the house become shaky. Now, what is Rashi? Rashi is our most famous commentator. What does Rashi say are the guards of the house? The ribs. The ribs are the guards of the house. And the men of valor, he says, are the legs. And the maids that grind grown few are idle. That's the teeth. And the ladies that peer through the windows is the eyes. Right? So there's, as Rashi reads it, as a lot of the commentators read it, it's like, this is like about the body in decline. And and what Ellen was saying was so important, I think, because we have been looking at this as the book of an old philosopher, of a man at the end of his life. And there is this way in which there's wisdom in this book, but it's a wisdom that comes from age, from having lived. There's a certain kind of perspective one can only have by having gone through a cycle of life. But we also hear in some of those descriptions a real vulnerability, a real, and Ellen says rightly that the vulnerability comes because it doesn't feel like a cycle. It feels like the end of something, right? And yes, of course, maybe my molecules will go. Here's the language, by the way, that it is so similar to what what Michal was describing earlier on, which is that the dust returns to the ground as it was, and the life breath returns to God who bestowed it. So there is an awareness of the cyclical, of the we too go back into the great all, right? But it's balanced. It's like, oh yes, the cycle continues, but I am at my end, right? And that's also part of the awareness here. Okay, just a few more minutes here. I see Joel Katz, who hasn't had a chance yet.
Yeah, this end section stands in contrast to how Kohelet opened. Kohelet opened with noticing or fixating on the natural world, the rivers, the sun going down and all that. But in this last section, the first section is what humans may notice of the world. But this last section sounds more like what humans are noticing about themselves. So it's an interesting contrast, or an interesting kind of complement to the opening section. We notice that we are afraid of heights. We notice there's terror on the road. We notice that a silver cord snaps and the golden bowl crashes, the jar is shattered, etc., etc., etc. So it's not just the natural world going through its cycles, but it's what transpires to us as human beings, and not just looking at the natural world itself. So it's
okay. That's very very elegantly put, Joel, because there's a kind of parallelism between the beginning and the end, explicit parallelism, right? Havel havalim, everything is vapor. But as Joel describes it, it's a parallelism, but it is one that has shifted from the beginning of the book, which was observational, looking at the cycles of the world and wondering what does all this mean, to suddenly looking inward and realizing like, oh, I too will vanish. There was a time for me, and now there is a time for not me, right? And it suddenly turned inward. And if it was true about the world, so it's true about me in a different way. Okay, so that's where we're at. We're at the end of this book, and it is a kind of a reflection. It is a kind of the end, maybe of King Solomon's life, but the end of this cycle of King Solomon's poetry. And that's, I guess, the last question is where do we leave? How is this the culmination of King Solomon's wisdom? Where do we leave him? Has he been, in other words, has he been defeated by life? Or has he achieved some kind of enlightenment or something else? All right, let's just take a couple of last thoughts. Janet.
I was thinking that they are truly reflections of an older generation. And oftentimes we say, we don't want to hear that stuff. You know, when our parents would say to us when we were younger, when you get to be older, you'll really understand what I'm talking about. And I see this, you know, we so often study to every season that part of the poem. And if only in later generations or more regularly we would be studying this, it would be just as Ellen said, you know, so beautiful to, what did Ellen, I wrote it down. Ellen said, this is how the world works. And if we could learn that, so we're learning that with you. So thank you, Rabbi Kasher, for sharing that with us.
Yeah, well, look, that's, you know, that's right. I think if there's wisdom to be gleaned here at the end, it's wisdom that was already there at the beginning. And it is that wisdom of everything passing. Like the central statement of Kohelet is that all things must pass. And don't we all feel that? Don't we feel everything just sort of moving faster and faster? I mean, and don't we feel that when we read the words of Kohelet, don't we feel that we spend all our time pursuing the least important things, right? Power and wealth and fame and even knowledge, right? And maybe we need to spend, maybe I certainly feel that one of the things this strange year has taught me is that I need to spend more time eating and drinking and being merry and enjoying life and just being here now in this experience, you know, before it turns into vapor and vanishes. So with that, let's close the books of Solomon, the 3 books of Solomonic poetry. It's been just such an honor, pleasure to be able to, I'm so grateful for this community, to have people who are willing to show up on a Wednesday night and dig through one of the most difficult and most profound of all biblical books. Really grateful for you. So thanks for being here with me. We will, next week, we'll return to the Book of Psalms and do a little work in the Book of Psalms before we dare another trilogy. All right. Good night, everyone. Nice to see you all. I think Hillel's got a music session in about an hour if you want to Zoom all night. But otherwise enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye, everyone.